So, watching MSNBC Hee Haw this morning, they talked a lot about the fact that many of these students from the high school where the mass murderer mowed down 17 of their fellow classmates are in D.C. protesting the failure of Donald Trump to take more action to pass, quote, common sense, close quote, gun control proposals. Several of them lay down near the White House in a protest that lasted about 6 minutes to coincide with how long the shooting rampage lasted. So the adults can't convince other adults to pass so-called common sense gun control legislation. So let's listen to children and listen to their arguments about why there should be more, quote, common sense gun control legislation. And again, in watching probably maybe 4 hours of television this morning, in and out, not one discussion about how many people are alive because someone was able to get a firearm and use it to defend himself or herself, nor did I hear any discussion whatsoever about the purpose of the Second Amendment, which is to prevent tyranny against government. Now, stay with me for a second. Donald Trump is Hitler. Donald Trump is a tyrant. Donald Trump doesn't care what the American people say or do, right? What's the purpose behind the Second Amendment? To prevent tyranny by government. So on the one hand, you're saying Donald Trump is a tyrant, he's a dictator. On the other hand, you're urging that we infringe further on the Second Amendment, whose very purpose was to prevent the rise of a tyrant. I'm confused. I really am. And how do you have a discussion about doing this and doing that and banning this and banning that without having any discussion whatsoever about the consequences? How many Americans are alive because someone was able to get a firearm and defend himself or herself, and now you're trying to take away that right? You have no idea how often. Now, when I did my documentary called Michael and Me, I interviewed a number of people. I interviewed Gary Kleck, a criminologist at Florida State. He estimates that 1.25 million Americans every single year use a firearm to defend himself or herself, usually just brandishing the gun. Out of that number, he says 40% believe that but for the firearm, they would have been dead. James Q. Wilson the late James Q. Wilson was a public policy professor at UCLA. Here's what he said about that.
We know from Census Bureau surveys that something beyond 100,000 uses of guns for self-defense occur every year. We know from smaller surveys of a commercial nature that the number may be as high as 2.5 or 3 million. We don't know what the right number is, but whatever the right number is, it's not a trivial number.
Now, what happened, of course, is tragic. Any school shooting is one school shooting too many. But can we please put this in perspective? The other morning, I'm watching cable, and some host says that parents are literally afraid to send their children to school. Really? 100,000 K through 12 schools in America. 51 million students enrolled. 2016, 2017, do you know how many students were killed? Those 2 years combined? This is according to one of the left-wing anti-gun websites. 3 students were killed in 2016, 4 were killed in 2017. Gun deaths in America? Non-suicide? 11,000. As I was saying when I talked to John Lott, the economist, the one who wrote More Guns, Less Crime, your odds of being killed in a school shooting are probably on par with your odds of being killed by lightning. And if we could do something about people being killed by lightning, we do something. What I'd like to know is why is there no discussion about how often guns are used for self-defense? Remember when Obama ordered the CDC to do research on it? And very quietly, the CDC released their research. And if you look at the numbers of outlets that reported on it, not very many people did. You know why? Because the CDC came back and they said defensive uses of guns are at least as frequently, at least as often as an illegal use of gun. Before Obama lifted the order, the CDC could not do research on defensive uses of guns. Don't ask me why. And when he lifted the order, the Atlantic had this headline: Executive Order the NRA should fear the most. ABC News reported that the CDC ban on gun research, quote, caused lasting damage, close quote. Salon, another left-wing website, said that the ban was part of the NRA's, quote, war on gun science, close quote. CBS News said that the NRA, because of the ban, had stymied CDC research. So they were ecstatic when Obama allowed the CDC to do their original research, find out how often Americans use guns to defend themselves. He asked the CDC. Key findings in their report called Priorities for Research to Reduce Threat of Firearm-Related Violence. They came out in June 2013. May I read you some excerpts? Thank you. Armed citizens are less likely to be injured by an attacker. I repeat, armed citizens are less likely to be injured by an attacker. Here's what it said, quote, studies that directly assess the effect of actual defensive uses of guns have found consistently lower injury rates among gun-using crime victims compared with victims who use other self-protective strategies, end of quote. Number 2, defensive uses of guns are common. Here's what the report said, and I quote, almost all national survey estimates indicate that defensive gun uses by victims are at least as common as offensive uses by criminals, with estimates of annual uses ranging from about 500,000 to more than 3 million per year in the context of about 300,000 violent crimes involving firearms in 2008. Conclusion number 3. Mass shootings and accidental firearm deaths account for a small fraction of gun-related deaths, and both are declining. Number 4, interventions, i.e. gun control, such as background checks, so-called rifle assault bans, and gun-free zones, produced mixed results. Quote, where the gun restrictions reduce firearm-related violence is an unresolved issue, close quote. They don't even know if these things work. Gun buyback programs, ineffective. Stolen guns, retail guns purchases account for very little crime. Most bad guys get their guns from friends. The vast majority of gun-related deaths are not homicides, but suicides. And I would add, when the Brady ban came into effect, gun suicides went down, but suicides did not. People just figured out another method. I'm Larry Elder. Don't leave town.
Larry Elder.